You are bad luck. Do not come back. That was the text. Sent by my mother at 11:51 p.m. A second later, another notification popped up. Morgan had loved the message. My sister had actually hearted the text, kicking me out of the family. I stared at the screen. My hands didn't shake. My eyes didn't sting. I just felt a cold, hard click in my chest, like a lock snapping shut. I reached for my laptop. On the screen, a single email was waiting from my lawyer. It was marked urgent. Final default. Notice. Awaiting signature. They thought they were cutting off a leech. They didn't know they were challenging the bank. I pulled my security key out of my pocket and plugged it into the side of the laptop. The system turned green. I typed 2 words. Execute, immediately. I hit enter. And just like that, I wasn't their daughter anymore. I was their landlord. To understand the execution, you have to witness the crime. 3 hours earlier, I stood on the porch of the estate, my knuckles white against the doorbell. The blizzard wasn't just falling. It was attacking. Ice pellets stung my face like birdshot. My coat, a cheap wool blend I had bought at an outlet, was already soaked through to the lining. The heavy oak door cracked open. Warm, golden light spilled out, carrying the scent of rosemary and expensive beeswax candles. Morgan stood in the gap. She wore a slip dress of crushed velvet that shimmered in the foyer light. She took one look at me, drenched, shivering, hair plastered to my skull, and wrinkled her nose. Ugh. Taylor. She didn't step back. She leaned into the crack, sniffing theatrically. You smell like exhaust fumes and damp wool. Did you actually take the bus? In a weather advisory? The Uber rates were surged, Morgan. Just let me in. And drag that sludge onto the foyer marble? She laughed, a brittle sound that snapped like dry wood. Absolutely not. You smell like public transport. Stand under the awning for 15 minutes. Let the wind blow the pour off you. Then I will check if you are breathable. The door slammed. The deadbolt slid home with a heavy thud. I stood there. The awning did nothing against the sideways sleet. My name is Taylor. I run a company that extracts hostages from war zones and executives from collapsing countries. I have negotiated with warlords. But on this porch, I was just the spare part. The failure. I checked my watch. 14 minutes. I endured every second. The cold seeped into my marrow, making my bones ache. They thought they were teaching me a lesson in humility. They were actually giving me time to do the math. When the door finally opened again, my fingers were too numb to unbutton my coat. I stepped inside, dripping dirty water onto the pristine tile. Stop. My mother, Brenda, rushed out of the living room. I reached for a stack of plush, white towels on the hallway console. She slapped my hand away. Are you insane? Her voice was a hiss. Those are Egyptian cotton. They are for guests. She scanned the room, panic in her eyes, then grabbed a balled-up, gray rag from the corner, the one used to wipe the dog's paws after a muddy walk. She threw it at my chest. It was stiff with old dirt and smelled of wet fur. Use Lucky's towel. And stay on the tile until you are dry. I pressed the dirty rag to my face to wipe the freezing rain from my eyes. Across the room, my father, Robert, sat by the roaring fireplace. He swirled the amber liquid in his crystal glass. He looked at me, then at the puddle forming around my boots. He didn't speak. He just turned his back to the door and took a sip of his scotch. That was the moment. The last shred of hope that this family loved me dissolved, replaced by simple, cold arithmetic. Dinner was served under the antique crystal chandelier, but the air in the room was so thick with tension you could choke on it. I walked toward the table. There were 4 places set with the good china the Royal Doulton set my grandmother had bought in London. Morgan was already seated. She looked up, saw me approaching the empty chair next to her, and immediately dropped her orange Hermes bag onto the cushion. Taken, she said. Her voice was flat. There are 4 chairs, Morgan. There are 4 of us. This is a $20,000 Birkin, Taylor. The leather scratches if it touches the floor. And honestly, it is worth more than your entire life. So it gets the seat. She patted the bag like it was a pet. Grab the stool from the kitchen island. You are used to bar seating, aren't you? Brenda set the turkey down with a heavy thud. Just get the stool, Taylor. Don't make a scene. Your father is all ready. She glanced at the head of the table. Robert wasn't looking at us. He was staring into his wine glass, his face flushed a dangerous shade of crimson. He snapped his fingers at Mom. The letter, Brenda. I know you hid it. Mom froze, the serving spoon hovering over the mashed potatoes. I don't know what you are talking about. The certified letter. Robert slammed his hand on the table, making the silverware jump. I saw the mail carrier scan it. The IRS doesn't send certified mail for a friendly chat. Did you hide it in the study? If they audit the offshore accounts because you were too stupid to. Not in front of her, Mom hissed, jerking her head toward me. Robert turned his glare on me. Right, the spy. I dragged the wooden stool in from the kitchen and sat at the corner of the table. My chin barely cleared the tablecloth. I looked like a child being punished. Thunder rattled the window panes. The chandelier flickered once, twice, casting long, dancing shadows across their faces. I didn't touch the food. I just stared at my watch. 11:38 p.m. Why aren't you eating? Morgan asked. She was tearing into a roll, butter dripping down her thumb. Oh, wait. Are you sulking? Is the little bus rider sad she didn't get a real chair? I watched the second hand sweep past the 12:10, I whispered. Excuse me? 9. 8. Morgan stopped chewing. She looked at Mom. She is doing it again. She is being a freak. 7. 6. Stop it, Robert barked. Stop counting. I looked up. For the first time all night, I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of someone who knows the end of the movie. Can you hear it? I asked softly. The room went silent. Just the wind howling outside. Hear what? Morgan's voice wavered. The Blades, I said. They are coming to collect the debt. The world turned off. 1 second. The chandelier was flickering against the storm. The next, the room plunged into absolute, suffocating blackness. My father's crystal glass hit the floor with a shatter. The smell of expensive scotch filled the air instantly. They cut the line, Robert screamed. It wasn't the voice of an arrogant patriarch anymore. It was the high, thin shriek of a guilty man. It is a hard cut. They do this before they breach. I told you, Brenda. I told you the Cayman transfer was flagged. Robert? Mom's voice trembled from the direction of the kitchen. Who is here? Is it the wind? It is the feds. The IRS. Dad was hyperventilating now. I heard the scuffle of fabric on the rug. He was actually crawling on his hands and knees. They found the offshore accounts. They are here to seize the house. A beam of harsh, blue-white light slashed through the black. Morgan had fired up her phone's flashlight. The beam swung wildly, illuminating terrified glimpses of the room. A spilled wine bottle bleeding into the tablecloth. My mother clutching her pearls. My father huddled under the heavy oak dining table like a frightened animal. Then the light hit me. Morgan steadied her hand. The beam pinned me against the wall like an insect. I squinted against the glare, but I stayed seated on my wooden stool. Hands folded in my lap. You, she hissed. She sounded unhinged. You did this. You texted them while we were eating. I haven't moved, Morgan. Liar. You are the rat. You tipped them off about the audit to get back at us. She took a step toward me, the light shaking in her grip. You witch. You brought this down on us. Thrum. The floorboards jumped under my feet. It wasn't wind. It was a rhythmic, percussive impact that hit the house like a physical blow. The crystal wine glasses on the table began to dance. Clink. 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 That is not a car, Mom whispered. She pressed her back against the refrigerator. Robert. That is not a police car. It is a tactical unit, Dad moaned from under the tablecloth. Heavy transport. They brought the battering ram. Oh God, I am going to prison. The vibration intensified. The windows rattled violently in their frames. Dust drifted down from the ceiling as the house began to shake in time with the mechanical heartbeat outside. I looked at the terrified faces of the people who had mocked me 5 minutes ago. They were stripping themselves bare, confessing their crimes to the dark, terrified of a monster they couldn't see. But I knew exactly what was out there. The noise stopped being a sound. It became a physical assault. The air pressure in the room plummeted. My ears popped painfully. On the mantelpiece, the heavy crystal vase vibrated to the edge of the marble and exploded on the hearth, showering the rug with glass. Then, the sun came out at midnight. A blinding, celestial white beam blasted through the bay window. It wasn't a flashlight. It was a searchlight, the kind used to hunt fugitives in a prison break. It swept the dining room, burning away the shadows and turning my family into pale, trembling ghosts. They are breaching, Robert screamed. He pressed his face into the Persian rug, covering his head with his hands. Brenda, get down, they have snipers. He looked up, squinting into the nuclear glare, and saw me. I was still sitting on the stool, hands resting calmly on my knees. His eyes went wide. Panic replaced the arrogance. He scrambled toward me on his hands and knees, grabbing the hem of my wet jeans. You, he gasped. Taylor, you go out there. What? Go out there. He yanked my leg, his fingernails digging into my ankle. Walk out the front door with your hands up. Tell them you did it. Tell them you cooked the books. You have nothing to lose, Taylor. You are nobody. I have a reputation. I have the estate. You want me to take the fall for your tax fraud? You owe us, he shrieked, spittle flying from his lips. We put a roof over your head. Go out there and save this family. I looked down at him. The man who had terrified me for 30 years. The man whose approval I had destroyed myself to earn. Now, he was just a coward, in a sweat-stained shirt, trying to trade his daughter for a plea deal. Crack. The double front doors didn't open. They blew inward. The lock splintered under the sheer force of the rotor wash. A wall of freezing wind and snow slammed into the foyer, swirling into the dining room like a mini blizzard. Papers flew off the desk. The curtains whipped violently, knocking over a lamp. Through the open door, the monster was visible. Hanging in the black sky, just 50 feet above the lawn, was a Leviathan, a Sikorsky S-92, blacked out, its rotors slicing the storm clouds, fighting the gale to hold its position. Figures were descending. 3 men in full tactical gear dropped onto the lawn, unhooking from fast ropes. They moved with terrifying precision, weapons low, helmet lights cutting through the snow. They marched up the steps, their boots heavy on the marble. "Don't shoot!" Morgan screamed, throwing herself behind the sofa. "I don't know him. I don't know anything about the money." The lead figure stepped into the dining room. He was a giant, encased in black body armor, rain streaming off his visor. He scanned the room. He saw my father cowering on the floor. He saw my mother weeping by the fridge. He stepped right over my father's legs. He walked straight to me. The soldier reached up and unclipped his oxygen mask. It was Captain Reed, my head of security. He looked tired. The flight through the blizzard had been brutal. He didn't yell freeze. He didn't pull out handcuffs. He reached into a waterproof pouch on his vest and pulled out a sleek, noise-canceling headset. "Ma'am," he shouted over the roar of the engines. He held the headset out to me like it was a crown. "Apologies for the dramatic entry. The storm grounded the light birds. We had to bring the heavy lifter." I stood up. My father let go of my ankle, staring up at Reed with his mouth hanging open. "What?" Robert whispered. Reed ignored him. He looked only at me. "The board is assembling, ma'am. The Tokyo merger vote is in 20 minutes. They need your biometric key to authorize the acquisition." I took the headset. I put it on, the noise-canceling cups instantly muting the roar of the helicopter to a distant hum. "Thank you, Captain," I said. "Let's go." "Taylor?" Morgan's voice was tiny, coming from behind the couch. "What? What is happening?" I tapped the headset, adjusting the mic. "Work, Morgan. It is called work." I stepped over my father's legs. He was still sprawled on the carpet, staring at the ceiling like a man who had just seen a ghost. "Taylor?" Morgan stood up from behind the couch, her voice trembling. "Wait. The house? You can't just leave us here with the police coming." "There are no police, Morgan. Not yet. But the raid. I own the mortgage," I said. The silence that followed was heavier than the storm. "Meridian Trust," I said, letting the name hang in the freezing air. "The blind holding company that bought your distressed note 3 years ago? That is me." I signaled to Reed. He handed me a tablet. I tapped the screen and turned it toward them. Clause 14. Section B. The Morality and Solvency Protocol. The tenant must remain free of federal investigation and maintain personal solvency. Robert, you have the IRS audit. Morgan, you have 6 maxed-out credit cards and a lien on your vehicle. I locked eyes with my father. "The lease is void. This is an eviction." Reed stepped forward. He didn't produce a weapon. He produced a piece of paper stamped with a federal seal. "Court writ of seizure," Reed barked. He pulled a clear, plastic evidence bag from his vest and held it open in front of Morgan. "Ma'am." "Place the item in the bag." Morgan clutched the orange leather to her chest. "My Birkin? You can't take this. It is a gift. It is listed collateral against the defaulted debt," Reed said. His voice was iron. "If you refuse, I will add obstruction of justice to the writ. Put the bag in the sack." Morgan looked at me, begging with her eyes. I didn't blink. With shaking hands, she dropped the $20,000 bag into the plastic. Reed sealed it with a sharp zip. "And the Porsche keys," Reed added. She dropped those in too. She was sobbing now, stripped of the only 2 things she actually loved. "Clear," Reed said into his comms. He handed me a carabiner attached to the winch line dangling from the ceiling. I clipped it to my harness. I looked at my family one last time. They were standing in the dark, in a house they no longer owned, holding nothing but their own arrogance. "Good luck with the audit," I said. I gave the signal. The winch engaged. My feet left the marble floor, and I ascended into the storm, leaving them in the cold. The winch pulled me up through the swirling snow, and for a moment, I was dangling between 2 worlds, the frozen hell below and the steel sanctuary above. Then, Strong hands grabbed my harness. Captain Reed pulled me onto the diamond plate floor of the Sikorsky. The heavy sliding door slammed shut, sealing out the wind, the cold, and the screaming family I left on the lawn. The silence inside the cabin wasn't empty. It was heavy, with the hum of turbine engines and the smell of aviation fuel. I unclipped the harness and sat on the bench seat. Through the thick plexiglass window, I watched the blue strobe lights of the real police cruisers snake their way up the driveway. They were 10 minutes late to save my father's ego, but right on time to arrest him. Justice wasn't swift, but it was absolute. The forensic accounting team took 4 months to unravel the knot of shell companies my father had built. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Robert pleaded no contest to 3 counts of wire fraud and 1 count of tax evasion. The judge was not impressed by his country club demeanor. She sentenced him to 6 years in federal prison, with eligibility for parole only after he served 4. The court also ordered restitution of $1,420,000. Morgan didn't fare much better. Without the family trust to cushion her fall, reality hit her like a freight train. She filed for Chapter 7 bankruptcy 45 days after the raid. The last I heard, the Porsche was auctioned off for $60,000 to pay her legal fees. The neighbors, the ones she tried so hard to impress, didn't rally around her. They gossiped. The invitations to the summer gala stopped coming. Her social currency crashed harder than her credit score. I didn't rejoice. I didn't pop champagne. I just signed the paperwork to sell the estate and wired the proceeds to a charity that supports financial literacy for at-risk youth. 6 months later, the ghost tried to haunt me one last time. It was a Tuesday morning. I was sitting on my balcony, drinking coffee, watching the sunrise over the city skyline. The air smelled of jasmine and exhaust, the scent of freedom. My assistant had dropped off the mail. On top of the stack was a plain white envelope. The return address was a correctional facility in upstate New York. The handwriting was jagged, desperate. I opened it. "Taylor," it read. "I did it for us. I am still your father. You owe me a visit. We need to talk about the appeal." He was still trying to negotiate. He still thought he had leverage. I looked at the letter. My pulse remained steady. My hands were still. A year ago, this letter would have sent me into a spiral of guilt and obligation. I would have agonized over the definition of duty. Now, I just saw ink on paper. I didn't burn it. I didn't rip it into dramatic little pieces. I walked inside, dropped the letter into the shredder, and watched the cross-cut blades turn his manipulation into confetti. I took another sip of coffee and went to work. That evening, I had dinner with Reed and my new operations director, Sarah. We sat at a corner table in a noisy bistro, sharing plates of pasta and cheap wine. We laughed about a logistical mix-up in Sudan until our sides hurt. Nobody insulted my clothes. Nobody made me sit on a stool. Nobody demanded I shrink so they could feel big. This is the lesson I paid a mansion to learn. Psychologists call it the scapegoat mechanism. Toxic families are like a cult. They have a shared delusion that they are perfect, that they are special. But deep down, they know they are broken. Robert knew he was a fraud. Morgan knew she was shallow, but they couldn't face that truth. It would destroy them. So, they needed a trash can. They needed someone to dump all their shame, their failures, and their insecurity into. That was me. As long as I was the bad luck, they could be the good family. As long as I was the failure, they could feel like successes. I stopped being their trash can. And the moment I refused to carry their garbage, they drowned in it. If you are listening to this, and your stomach hurts every time you pull into your parents' driveway, listen to me. Silence is the loudest scream. I spent years trying to explain myself, trying to defend my choices. It never worked. Explanations are just fuel for their fire. Real power moves in silence. You don't need to announce your departure. You just leave. You have to understand the sunk cost of blood. This is the hardest rule. We are programmed to believe that shared DNA is a suicide pact. We think we owe them loyalty because they gave us life. But a family that requires you to cut off pieces of your soul to fit in is not a family. It is a hostage situation. You are allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, even if you have their eyes. Success is the best exorcism. I couldn't heal in that house. You cannot get well in the same environment that made you sick. I had to build a fortress of competence and financial independence so high that their insults couldn't reach me. Look at your phone right now. Scroll through your contacts. Who is the person you are afraid to tell your good news to? Who is the person who makes you feel small just by seeing their name pop up? That person is an anchor. They are dragging you to the bottom of the ocean to drown with them. Cut the rope. I am Taylor. And I am free.